right.
This is the Saber Coach Kate podcast, where I highlight the great thinkers, athletes, and coaches in the dynamic sport of Olympic fencing.
Guard. We're on it.
Carla-Mae Richards allowed me to interview her the first day of Summer Nationals this year. It was really intimidating because she is a legend in our sport. Not only was she a fencer back when girls weren't really allowed to participate in sports, but she eventually became the first executive director of what would become the United States Fencing Association. She has had a direct influence on many aspects of fencing, including the structure of the North American Cup, or NAC, tournament series. If you want to read the speech she gave as she was being inducted into the Fencing Hall of Fame, visit usfencinghall-fame.com/wp/Richards-Carla-May. Here's a quote from it. "Though I never succeeded as an athlete beyond New England fencing, there remained the fierce determination of the competitor to prove oneself. And so I traded the sword for the pen and paved the way for future growth, not just in numbers, but in stature of and respect for U.S. athletes. It was a roller coaster ride, especially with little preparation. Today, one would look for a person with sports administration background and perhaps an MBA. I was a computer programmer, a part-time high school fencing coach, and partner in our own fencing businesses. To say that I tackled the challenges by the seat of my pants is an understatement, and I landed on my seat more times than I can recall. The learning process was arduous, not just for me, but for all the volunteers who were conditioned to run the organization from the get-go. Listen as Miss Richards tells you many stories about her experiences helping American fencing grow on the international stage. You'll probably recognize some of the names of people she mentions. She knows a lot of people." Hello, this is the Saber Coach Kate podcast, and my guest today is Ms. Carla-Mae Richards. Thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed here at Summer Nationals. You just finished day one up on the bout committee, and I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me after a long day on the bout committee.
That's okay. It's no problem. I appreciate your interest in me.
Well, let's get started. How did you become a fencer?
That's a good story. As I was growing up, especially during high school, I was very much into ball sports. And in those days, you were called a tomboy. My dad was a very sensitive piano playing. He was trained as a classical pianist, but he never was interested in ball sports. So he decided at one point that I needed to learn better balance. I need to get better coordination. So he put me in ballet school, and that worked for about 3 months, and then we said no. So then he discovered fencing at the Henry Hudson Hotel. And he says, "Why don't you try this? Because it gives you balance, poise, and it's athletic." So that's where I started, was at the Henry Hudson Hotel.
And how old were you at the time?
Probably that was when I was 16 or 17. It was my junior, senior year period of time.
Okay. What was it about fencing that appealed to you?
It was athletic, and my father would accept it. I knew nothing about it, and when you're first learning, you're like, I have to stand how? I have to do what? And the legs don't cooperate, or they don't feel right. So the beginning is, I knew I had to stick with that, or I'd have more worries than not.
Right. So better to stick with that than... Yeah.
Right. And the people there were very interesting people. And I kind of watched from the sidelines, but it was interesting because there were some top fences there. Albie Axelrod was there, and some of the very good fences. So I started there, and then I landed up with Eddie Lucia as my coach. But at Henry Hudson Hotel, I believe that was Sal Santelli. So it was a good sport. It got very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said that you started as a junior, senior in high school, but you got to fence on the Brandeis fencing team. So how did that all happen?
Well, when the fencing coach found out that I had any fencing, she wanted, yes, because her women's program was relatively new. Sure. So they didn't recruit in those days. So it just happened to find out that there was fencing there. And actually, we go back a little bit, because when I graduated from high school, I went to MIT for a year. Mm-hmm. And at MIT, I knew there was fencing, but I could never find it. And then I found out it was just men. And then after my first year at MIT, I transferred to Brandeis. I decided I didn't want to be an engineer. Let's go into something else. So I ended up at Brandeis. I found out there was fencing. I showed up. I said I had some fencing. I had only done novice competitions at that point. But the fact that I knew how to stand and how to advance and retreat and lunge, she knew that she had somebody that had some of the basics.
Right.
So she was a good lady, Mrs. Liesel Judge. Mm. Yeah.
And what were women's sports like at the time on that campus?
You know, I never really got to know about any of the other women's sports. I don't think there were many in those days. I mean, those were the days where women were not to compete. There weren't many sports at Brandeis at that time. Brandeis was relatively new when I went there, because it had started in 48, and I was there in 55.
Okay.
So, you know, the world of women's sports, there was no such thing.
Right.
You know, maybe track and field a little bit, but, and I like basketball, but there was no such thing.
Right, right. Who were your teammates at Brandeis, and who were the coaches?
Well, the only coach we had at that point was Liesel Judge, and she's the one that started the program, and she kept it going for a long time. And then Bill Shipman came in to go both the men and women's. The only teammate I really remember, somebody that I've been in contact recently, is Barbara Keel, but she's going by a different name. But I worked while I was going to school. So I got there for practice, and then I'd work, and I got there for competitions. I never really got to know people there. I was a transfer student also,
Right.
and I didn't live on campus. So I didn't really make friends that were lasting.
Right.
Just we never got to know each other.
Well, you had too many other things
Right.
going on.
Right.
Yeah. What are you most proud about in reference to your fencing?
What am I most proud about? What?
About your fencing, like, you know, maybe you won a novice competition, or you're proud that you just helped Brandeis have a fencing team.
I guess the one competition I always remembered, because I did as well as I could expect to do, it was our North Atlantic Section Championships. I don't remember what year now. And I was fifth, but what was exciting about it was I had a bout with a fencer whose name was Madeline Miyamoto, the most beautiful fencer. She just flowed, and I got touches on her.
Oh, wow.
And that meant something to me, that, you know, I was getting to be a fencer.
Right, right. What's the best advice you received as a fencer?
Well, the other part of the story of my coaches was my husband was my coach. And he would get very exasperated. And he had a very simple game, very effective game. And his thing was, stop thinking and let the point do the work. And that's how he fenced. And it was true. You can get in the own way by trying to think each move that sometimes you just have to do. And I think that's probably the best
I'm coached by my husband, which, for the most part, works out really well for us.
But there are moments.
There are moments. So what was it like for you to be coached by your husband?
Exasperating. Because I met my husband not as a coach. I met him when I was fencing at Brandeis. He was one of the referees. And he never gave me right of way because it turns out I was a counter thrust.
Oh.
I was a counter timer, but I didn't realize that.
Mm-hmm.
So I really would get into these slightly heated discussions about what he called. And then we got to know each other after I graduated from Brandeis. Mm-hmm. And I forgot what your question was.
Oh, what's it like to be coached by your husband?
Difficult.
Yeah.
And what we landed up doing, because I stopped competing, is we got our own club and business. And so I was the business manager and he was the coach.
Got it. Okay.
And that worked well. We were a good team that way.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a good coach.
Can you tell me more about that club?
It was, we started out as, we had Carla-Mae Richards was the fencing club. Academy Fencing was a fencing school where we ran classes. And Creative Sports was an equipment company. And we had this little old shoemaker in Billerica, I think it was, who made fencing shoes based on Ed's comments about the problem with fencing shoes. So we had our own fencing shoe.
Wow.
Creative Sports fencing shoe. So and we were in Watertown, and the building, the room that we used had been, what would you call it? Not a restaurant, a dining room for a company.
Okay.
Run by American Publishing, Herb Cavett. He was interested in learning fencing. He wasn't using the space. He said, "Would you like to use this space?" And we said, "Yeah." We could put 3 or 4 strips down there.
Yeah.
There was space for an office.
Mm-hmm.
So Herb Cavett got his lessons, and we got our space.
Wow. How many students did you have?
I don't know. I probably a couple of hundred. I never counted.
That's big for a club.
Yeah, but it's over time.
Oh, okay.
Over
Gotcha.
time, you know,
Gotcha.
not at any one time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They came and went. Our philosophy was that fencing, and especially we had some older people, I mean, not teenagers.
Yeah.
And our philosophy was that fencing will help them find themselves. Not that they were going to be stars. We didn't coach them or run it to make stars. We coached them to have fencing, especially girls, to overcome their hesitation of being aggressive. Mm-hmm. And I worked with the Concord Carlisle High School girls team for a couple of years, and that was one of the things that we really want. It's okay to hit them.
Yeah.
It's okay to assert yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And with the women, it's okay to be an athlete. And remember, those are the days where women's sports was, Billie Jean was our idol.
Oh, yeah.
You know, for what she was doing, so.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, that leads me to my next question. I wanted to ask you what it was like to be involved in sports back when you were, and then up to the time when Title IX came into being.
The opportunities weren't there, you know. I remember I did basketball for a while, probably in high school, and you were restricted. You played half court. You couldn't play full court.
Basketball?
Yeah, you couldn't. You had to stay in. Yeah, it was not men's basketball.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, if you were interested in any kind of ball sport, you were a tomboy.
Yeah.
You were
And
classified.
that wasn't a good thing to be.
No, that's what got my father. He says, "You're a lady. You got to be a lady." And I didn't want to be a lady. I wanted to be an athlete. Ladies come, you know, that's okay. That's, you know.
You could be a lady after.
Yeah,
you know?
right. You know, what's the benefit?
Right. I'm with you there. Yeah.
No, yeah, that was our toughest time. His attitude. No, he was good. I mean, he was looking out for my future.
Right.
You know, as a female in those days. Mm-hmm. And females had to be prim and proper, and you had to wear heels, you had to wear dresses, you know, eventually you had to wear makeup and
Get married,
right,
have the family,
right,
all of that.
right.
Yeah. And anyone who was outside that ideal
Well, it's like this, not only do you want to consider what women in sports, but women in business.
Right.
I mean, it was all the same culture that women don't have a place where the men are. You know, it's only World War II that started to turn things around, but when World War II was over, the women in the factory had to go home and be homemakers.
Right.
You know, but the thought, the seed had been planted.
Yep.
And it just took time to really make a push.
What do you think it was that actually made that change? Was it that those women didn't like being back in the home and wanted something more?
I think the women discovered what it was to have a greater interest, that they had skills beyond just homemaking, and they weren't being used.
Right.
And the women who went to college knew that they had something more, but they couldn't find a place for themselves. You know, the world kept pushing them down. But, you know, I forget who it was. There were some women in that period of time who said, we want to be the same as men in terms of the employment, in terms of respect, in terms of our brains.
Yeah.
And it took some strong women who got, you know, people didn't like them because they were so outspoken, but they made the difference. They opened that door. They cracked it open.
Well, you mentioned that you went to MIT to become an engineer, and I think about one of our former fencers who's at the Stevens Institute of Technology now, and how she has opportunities thanks to women such as yourself that led the way and decided, no, I want this for myself.
Yeah, but I couldn't get it there at MIT because of a class of 700, 800, there were maybe 20 of us.
Wow.
And maybe 5 graduated.
Yeah.
And a professor said to me when I went up to ask him for some clarification, what are you doing here? You belong in the home. Yeah. And the attitude was very prevalent in those days. Women in an engineering school, what are you doing here? You're taking up a man's spot.
Got it.
And it's like,
even though you'd earned your way in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody got a free ride. But it was tough.
Yeah.
It was really tough. So I ended up going to Brandeis and majoring in psychology just to get a degree.
Right.
And not that I was going to do anything. I was interested in it, but I couldn't afford to go on and get a PhD, which you have to do in psychology. So I couldn't do that.
Yeah. Wow. Talk to me about some of the other pioneers in women's fencing that you've known over the years.
Well, I'll go back quite a few years with Jan Romery, who was 6-time national champion, and Maxine
Foil,
Mitchell.
of course, right?
Pardon me?
In foil, right?
Yeah, that's all they fenced.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing to talk about the modern era with Marion Sagunas and all she's done and those women, but if you go back to the days when only foil was allowed, there was the West Coast women, for some reason, were really strong. And they were good fencers. They had good training, and they persisted. But it was just a foil. Now, it was Cynthia Carter was one of the persons from Washington, D.C., and Eleanor Turney, who said, why can't we do epee? What's wrong? Why can't we do the other weapons? So they got epee going. And once they got epee going, they snuck in saber. It took time.
Yeah.
You know, because the men just, no, you're too fragile. If I got a foil in my hand, I can't be fragile.
Right.
But it was that whole image.
Right.
And the organization, especially international organizations, very male chauvinist. Even today.
Yeah.
You can't find women in any important roles. Stacey Johnson has made a breakthrough, yes. That whole team, that's Stacey Johnson, I can't remember, Vinnie Bradford, and there was a couple of others. I could see them. I can't think of their names. San Jose State.
Yes.
They showed the world what fencing could be for women. And a lot of that was Mike Tesoro as their coach. Between Mike Tesoro as their coach, who believed anybody could do it, didn't make any difference what sex they were, and those women who were very strong women.
Yes.
I mean, They weren't going to take no. To this day, they say she won't take no.
And then during your time as a fencer, you started getting involved in the behind-the-scenes aspect of fencing. How did you first decide that you wanted to be a part of the organizational side of things?
There was a very well-known fencer, captain of an Olympic team, Ralph Goldstein, who talked me into becoming a referee. And then from there, it was just helping out at some of the competitions, running them. And then I found I just perceived myself of never really being a champion. Even though I liked the athleticism, I didn't quite have the gumption, I guess in one way you could say. And I was more interested in the operation. And New England Division was needing some people to kind of take the program and make it go. And we were having problems with competitions, how they were run, refereeing, a lot of things that happen all over the country. Mm-hmm. So I just kind of started doing some things with running competitions, and then I got into the organization, New England Division organization. Mm-hmm. And it just went from there. I just found my husband was the fencer, and he had the passion for fencing, doing it. Mm-hmm. And I developed the passion for the organization to have it better run for everybody, for the athletes. Mm-hmm. Nobody really was thinking about it's for the athletes. They were just thinking of how to get this done, how to make some money or break even or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I just, the combination worked out.
What were some of the changes that you helped implement so that you could improve the athlete's experience?
That's a multi-layer question. When I was asked to consider being the first executive director by Ralph Zimmerman, actually, we had a long talk about what could I do and not do, what was needed. And the key component then was communication. The organization did not communicate well to the members of the organization of what they were doing and how they were doing. And up until that point, I guess the key problem was the selection of Olympic team and world teams. It was subjective. Well, she's a better fencer in this case. Well, no, she's got the potential here, or, oh, I like this fencer. It wasn't a proven system that said you earned the way. They liked you as a fencer, but they liked you as a person, whatever. And not that we didn't have some good fencers on the Olympic team, but it was more subjective than anything. So that's part of that communication to how are things done? How are athletes chosen? How are the competitions run? The competitions were run all over the place. We didn't have a system in place that this is how you run your competition. They could figure out formats. Some of them are wild formats. So the idea behind starting an office, and Michelle Momlick was the one that pushed the organization to open an office when the Olympic Committee offered free space at the Olympic Training Camp Center. And he pushed for me. So my work originally was just to start to establish communication. What are we doing? Let the world know. And during that period of time, we came up with a newsletter to send out to the fencers saying, the board met and these are decisions they made. Nobody knew what the board was doing. These competitions are going on, or these are the rules that one needs to follow. And so over the period of time, we said, in order to have the best team internationally, we weren't winning medals. We needed some kind of system. We needed to give athletes stronger competitions, not just a local. So we said, let's have a national circuit. And so it was not just me. There were other people involved. I mean, some of the people from the FOC and some of the people that were on the board was, let's do a circuit. And we called it the North American Circuit. And what the idea was, there were some competitions and regions that drew people from different areas. So we started with those competitions as part of it. In order to be part of it, you had to follow these rules. In how you ran it, how you accepted entries, what are the referees, to get some uniformity, and at the same time attract fences because they'll know they'll get a fair break in the competition. They're not going to get bias in the referee. And so it started with a small, 2 or 3, I can't remember. I know Michelle Allo was one of them. And then it expanded over time, and it became the focal point. The other thing was that Sherry Postrum has pointed out we needed to do something for the youngsters within their own group. Having the youngsters fence in adult competition was not the best way for development. And psychologically, for the different ages involved, it was more negative than positive.
Yeah, that'd be really intimidating.
Yeah, and the parents would push because there were scholarships involved at some of the schools. So, and I don't remember, I was not the one, I think it was, what the heck was it, Tom? I can't think of his name. It was somebody from New Jersey who, I can't think of it, who was very instrumental in helping us develop a youth program of competitions. And we started off with, in 1972, Reverend Calhoun got us to do a Junior Olympic Championships. And then you had to figure out how do you qualify for it. And so that brought in some junior competitions in different divisions. So you would qualify from that. And what we were doing was developing a strata. So in order to get here, you had to do certain things. You had to perform. So that was with the youth and the juniors mostly, and then the cadets, because at that point there was only a Junior World Championships. Then when they brought in the cadet championships, then we expanded it. And then it went down to the young people. They were going, the 7-year-olds were going to compete. We had, I guess what brought it to a climax was Bill Reith in Cleveland, Ohio, when we had a JOs there, I think. He added events of his own inclination for youth.
Okay.
I said, you can't do that. I said, you want to be champion, you got to focus on the competition. You can't have all these side events. So then we said, okay, you're trying to prove something, you prove the point, let's start something for them. And so it grew out of that.
So if little 7-year-old kids wanted to compete, then they had to compete with adults potentially? Like before all this started?
There weren't youth. I think some places might have had something, I don't know, but there wasn't any formal youth program, youth competitions.
Wow, I didn't know about that.
What you had at that time was open competitions, Class C, Class B, where in Class C competitions, the highest ranked had to be a C, no higher than C. Well, everything was done by classifications, and getting those classifications was an interesting battle.
I was going to ask you about that. How did classifications?
Well, we had a table. We had a table that said, if you have so many of these and so many of these and so many of these, and some people would manufacture competitions to get these people to fence in it so they get the rating. And so it got to be, does it really mean what it's supposed to mean?
Right.
So I mean, classifications today do mean something, but more important is the point system.
Yeah. Well, because that trickles down quite a ways.
Right.
And sometimes, you can do pretty well and go pretty far just by being a regular attender. Sometimes it does truly pay to show up.
Oh, yeah, no question about it. I mean, it's true. It's been true all along. Just participation in itself will help you be better. But we wanted people to get more varied competition, not just their own area, because you don't grow. You don't become better in terms of all the other people that are fencing. And then with the youth program, what happened, it exploded the world of fencing for us. I mean, it's like all of a sudden, you had the whole range. I mean, later on we added the veterans. And it opened this whole range so that anybody who had this inkling of fencing could find some place to do it. And for the kids, particularly young people who are not interested in team sports and the parents are trying to find something, fencing was ideal.
Yes.
You know, it's just, and many people, many of the clubs have worked it out where they have study time and then they fence and they get their lessons and they have to meet certain standards academically as well, you know, so they incorporate to help the parents out with the kids. And it's grown like topsy-turvy.
Well, now it seems like our organization is focused more on the kids than on the older people. And it sounds like back in the day it was all on, you know, based on adults, and then kids and older adults were more of an afterthought.
The NAC is really for the older, or for the more mature fencer, the junior, but then you have the junior cadet in the Division I. The organization realized that if our fencers were going to get better internationally, they had to compete internationally. When my husband fenced in the 60s, we didn't go into international, except world championships. And the world championships you just picked from the national championship results. And we did something, but not a lot. And so it was through the international committee as well, of people on that committee who said, for us to grow internationally, for us to become a power, not only do we attend meetings, but we have to have fences who show the world they're as good as they are, and we're somebody you have to contend with.
Right.
So it has a lot of ramifications on it. So that's when we started getting some funding for them to go to World Cups.
Got it. Okay. Do you remember where we first sent athletes to World Cups? Okay.
Let's see, I started there in 83. Probably late 80s, early 90s, but Andy Shaw is the one to ask for something like that.
Right about that.
He's got those numbers. I don't, or George Kay, actually. He knows.
Is there anything that during your time on the executive board that you wish you had been able to achieve? You've accomplished a lot, but was there anything that you were trying to do that just wasn't able to happen at the time?
Well, one of the things that comes to mind was the coaching end of things. We had the coaches' college, and we were trying to use that to raise the level of many of the coaches who had been fencers and took up coaching or knew enough to do it, but needed more exposure to coaching principles, and also to help the coaches be better with the young fencers in terms of egos, in terms of psychology.
Right.
So coaching, we were making some headway, but it was a difficult one to really, and we were not fighting, but there was the U.S. Fencing Coaches Association and U.S. Fencing, and the twain didn't always meet. They didn't always meet.
Yeah.
You know, you're taking away authority, and we weren't trying to do that, but we were trying to expand. It's hard. It's hard. And the other thing was to provide more money to the athletes, because what we needed them to do was expensive.
Right.
And the equipment was just getting more expensive.
Yeah.
And lessons and the whole thing. And I guess the other thing was to have more training camps per se, not just camps, but training camps for the elite fencers. So they had an opportunity to work with each other and national level coaches.
Right, and not just in their individual clubs, but to actually bring them together.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and we did that for a while, but it never really got off the ground. I don't know today. I'm way out of touch today, what's going on, so.
Now, our organization used to be entirely run by volunteers, and a lot of people still volunteer a lot of their time and vacation time, but now we have paid national office staff. So can you talk to me about how that transition took place and the results of having paid national staff?
Well, as I said, Michelle Momlick pushed the organization to have an executive director and make use of the offer from the U.S. Olympic Committee for office space. And we needed something like a secretary person, so we hired somebody, local Ann Whiting, whose husband was involved with the Olympic Committee. So it was just the two of us for a while. But as we were expanding programs, we realized that volunteers tend to draw on their own experience or their own world, and not necessarily on a national level. And we needed to be able to coordinate the programs nationwide. So I think the next person we hired, I'm not sure, well, it's membership, because that was one of the goals. That we had like 7,000 members. We wanted to do something to membership, and then PR. And those were areas that volunteers would do as they had time.
Right.
It wasn't on a regular basis, and it wasn't structured. That, okay, we do this step and this step and this step, and if that doesn't work, we do this. And the PR, it took time to get PR, because who wants sports? In the sport world was fencing. So it's just getting more publicity one way or the other. So, and just from that, just from all the programs that were initiated or that were growing, needed a person in each area full time. Volunteers gave a lot to this organization, and they still do. But they have a life. They have their own jobs. We could never pay them what they're worth to us. So the problem that comes up that we dealt with, and I think they're still dealing with, and I think it's true in any organization, how do you blend the volunteers with the staff? How do you get them to work with each other? How do you get them to help each other? And now the organization is very much staff-driven, whereas before it was a combination staff-volunteer. And the volunteers did not take too lightly the establishment of office and staff.
I'm sure not. They were used to being in charge, and now suddenly there's someone
who's telling them what they could do and not do. And they say, wait a minute, we started this thing. We've been doing this. We know what we're doing. And we're saying, yeah, but we got a bigger picture that we're trying to fill out.
Well, and that still holds true today. I mean, somebody from Colorado Springs is telling me in Texas what to do. Right. And you're right, we don't always see the big picture. Right. And
we don't communicate well anymore. I mean, that national newsletter really served a purpose because it talked to the members about issues or about programs. And the magazine does a great job, but the newsletter was addressed to each member or divisions. We're going to start this program, and here's why. And here's how it's going to function, and here's how we need you. And that personalized thing really made a difference because people began to feel a part of the organization. Before, it was them versus us, which happens with big corporations. Right. And so anytime you have a staff, we're going to run into that problem.
Well, and it's interesting that in this day and age, with technology being at our fingertips, that communication is more difficult than back in that time when a newsletter was probably hand addressed to people and mailed to their.
Well, we had a mailing house.
Oh, okay.
That wasn't it. I wrote most of it, and we had printing press, a press to do it. I think now everybody is so acclimated to website stuff, and I'm not sure. I don't go out there that frequently to the fencing website because mostly it's used to, oh, we did this, or, what the fences are doing. And I don't find a lot of in-depth information.
Well, and no explanations about why are we doing this. Yeah.
Right, right. And the staff reaches a point where we know what's best. And that's a tough one.
Yeah.
That's a tough one. Nobody ever likes that.
No. Well, now you work on bout committee. And how has being on the bout committee changed over the years? I'm really curious about this one.
It's true.
Because y'all are the ones that make all of these huge tournaments actually happen.
We had 3x5 cards, literally.
That's amazing to me.
And you would rank them. You put all the A's and the B's and the C's. I mean, there would be the name, the club, the division, and the classification. And actually, we printed out a lot after a while. We got to that point. And then you'd order them by the A's, B's, C's. And then before there was a ranking, well, there was a ranking. There was a national ranking based on national championships results. We'd use that ranking. And the others fell where they were going to fall.
Yeah.
Random. And we just
put the cards out on the table
just,
in little piles.
Just go around like this. It worked for a long time. Really did. And then Dan McCormick came along and he started finding ways to put it on a computer and having stuff come out from the computer. And in the beginning, it was a little primitive, but it had improved with each year. So it made the work. I mean, like he would get the seating list done, and if we had ranked them right, we'd do the seating or randomize the A's and B's, and then do the pools and stuff, separating divisions or club mates type of thing. And, that was very helpful. We were able to finally get rid of the cards. Though, I'll tell you, we always kept cards with us because we never knew if the computer would work.
That's how technology is, even today.
The early stage of technology, and you're like, okay, let's print out those cards and just have them. You never know. The lights might go out, and everything may blow up.
Somebody accidentally unplugs the system.
Right. And then Dan Burke and the FIA, this whole fencing time program just grew over time, and it became so much more sophisticated and so much better than Dan's program. But, Dan did this on his own. He didn't get paid for it.
Yeah.
So he opened that door, and Dan took it from there and done a great job.
Yeah, the two Dans. I think Dan McCormick, right?
Dan
and then
Burke.
Dan Burke, right?
Right.
Yeah. Talk to me about some of the people you have met over the years, thanks to fencing. This is the question that a lot of people wanted me to ask, because you have known so many people, and who is it that stands out in particular to you?
Partly you're asking for my memory, too. Well, as I mentioned before, the Ralph Zimmerman and George Kay and Sherry Posthumus is one of my most favorite people. She was a good lady and a good friend. Jan Romery, I knew Jan and her husband. I can't think of his name right now. But they were very good friends with Ed, because Jan and Ed, I think, were teammates at one time. There's just so many people that have crossed my path. It's hard to really say. Everybody had something different to offer. I hate to just... I don't know. I was trying to think of some people. I've been working on my life story, so I was making some notes here to try to remember people. But, the Ralph Goldstein, who was really important to my life, and Albie Axelrod, because he showed how good we could be. He was a son of a gun. And I saw through him and some other people I can't think of right now. You have to be self-centered to an extent to be a good athlete.
Yeah.
You have to think of what you need and what's in your best interest to become better. And that's hard in a social world sometimes to accept.
Yes.
And it took a long time for me to understand the nature of the athlete. I learned a lot from my husband that way. You know, when he was getting ready for a competition, couldn't talk to him much for 6 weeks. And he was just focusing in on the competition and preparing his mind more than his body for the competition. And when I started competing, I realized that I'm not a competitor like that.
Yeah.
You know, you have to have a certain fierceness, determination. So I would say my husband, of course, Ed Richards, because he did so well, you know, twice national champion and really a good coach and an Olympian. And he was very proud of what he had. And he was a three-weapon man.
Yes.
He made the finals in all three. So he meant a lot in my life, not just as my husband, but as an athlete, as a fencer. I said Ralph Goldstein. There's so many people. Steve Sobel, Erwin Bernstein. These are people that showed me administratively what the organization, they were very organized. Sam Cheris, who ran the international committee for a long time and learned a lot from him. And, you know, I mean, the people today, like the Meredith Delgados of the world, I mean, she puts so much time and effort and is good and has a great personality. And Brandon, what he's been doing, you know, the new people now are just doing so much for fencing.
Yeah.
That, there are a lot of people that have crossed my path. Liesl Judge, my fencing coach at Brandeis. She was a good woman. And Eddie Lucia. He was really an interesting man, interesting coach. I guess there are a lot more people, but the names just don't come to mind that easily.
Well, and can you finish up this series of questions by telling me your favorite fencing story?
I think I've lost more than I remember. I guess if you mean experience for story,
Sure.
I would say when I went to the Olympic Games with the team in Sydney, Australia, it was interesting to be there, well, to be in the Olympics, at the Olympic Games, to be with those athletes, to be able to help wherever I could, and then to write daily articles about what was going on, because I wanted the members to feel a part of the team. In terms of stories, individual stories, the only one I ever remember was my bout with Madeline Miyamoto. You know, there's so many things have happened over the years.
Yeah.
You know, the memory's not what it used to be. My husband could outdo me any day in stories.
Well, there are so many things that you've experienced. I'm not surprised that you can't just focus in on one of them when it's an overwhelming combination of everything.
Yeah, it was so good to have a passion and be able to do something with it constructive. And being, you know, taking on that job as executive director, there was some negative impacts to my family. Moving them from Boston to Colorado Springs, and my kids were going to go to a different school, different environment, their friends. My husband, we were giving up our club. You know, what was my husband going to do? It was a life-changing decision for everybody.
Yeah.
And I guess that, more than anything, making that decision was probably one of the most difficult things I did, but I did it.
Yeah, you did.
In spite of. Sometimes I wonder.
Well, as an athlete who goes to NACS and as someone who also runs tournaments, I thank you for making that decision, because had you not, this Summer Nationals might not have even happened, or,
Summer
you know, the
Nationals
NACS.
Nationals would always be there. It's just the growth. with the amazing growth that's taken place since 1983. It's like 34 years ago. It's not that long when you're thinking about fencing's been around since the turn of the century. I don't know. I was of a mind at that time, and it's part of my nature that drove people crazy that I had to do it. I just felt that I could make a difference. And in spite of having to move my family and change their lives, I mean, my husband was in agreement with it, but it changed a lot of lives. We had a good home. We had a good life there. And it turned the world upside down. But fortunately, my kids have come out of it, and they're great adults, great wives, husbands, family, They survived it. Right. So, it was not easy. I'm glad I did it. But I'm sad that it cost so much.
Yeah. Well, and when I think about how I was able to just sign up for a fencing class and nobody batted an eye because I'm female, again, my gratitude toward you and the other female pioneers is outrageous. I mean,
there were some fierce women out there who just said, we want to be able to do all the weapons. There's no reason why not.
Yeah.
And Cynthia Carter was in science, so she proved that it wasn't harmful at all. She was adamant. She was a good lady. And Ellen Attorney, I mean, she stuck it out there. She was not so much a fencer as a spokesperson or somebody who was trying to do the most she could for the sport. I mean, she had these records that were antiquated records in terms of the method of storage. But she had been a volunteer secretary for a long time. And the Latskos, who were the treasurers, they did a lot. And those people kept us going, and then we had to bring in newer people who could move more with the times.
Okay, well, we'll finish up this interview with a mixture of famous questions from James Lipton and Marcel Proust. What is your favorite word?
Compassion.
What is your least favorite word?
Hatred.
What sound or noise do you love?
Bells.
What kind of bells?
Church bells.
Okay. What sound or noise do you hate?
Young children who talk at the top of their lungs. And with the hearing problem, you're more sensitive to it.
Right.
It's hard to understand them.
Yeah. What profession other than your own would you have liked to attempt?
Teacher. That's what I was trying to do at one point.
What kind of teacher?
I don't know. I was going to go to the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and that was what I was looking. I didn't know what I'd be teaching. Probably some level of psychology.
Okay.
Because I was very interested in what made people tick, what made me tick.
Well, and that degree that you got in it really came in handy.
No, bachelor's degree in psychology is nothing. It's a degree. It doesn't get you anything.
Okay.
No, it's a key to go on if you want. But I mean, I did it because I liked it, and I worked with. I did some internships with working with children in a clinic. But it wasn't enough to go on and do anything. What I know now, I might have done counseling. Might have gone into counseling.
Okay. And what profession would you have not liked to do?
Engineering, which is what I went into. And that was not for me. Yeah. I didn't have the mind for it.
Where would you like to live?
Probably like the Bahamas.
Someplace warm and with
warm
lots of sand?
by the water.
What do you value most in your friends?
Trust and care.
Who is your hero?
A few years ago, I probably could have answered that, but I've lost track. What was my hero? What is a hero? It's a composite, really, you know. I don't have an answer for that.
Okay. And what is your motto?
What did I say before? Remember I told you?
Yes, I think you said be true to yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
be true to yourself.
Yeah, because without that,
You can't be true to anybody. You're putting on a facade, which we tend to do sometimes.
yeah.
Yeah, you get,
Just
to
a
get
little
by.
bit, yeah.
To get by. You don't want somebody to really know how you're feeling.
Yeah.
Or when you get hurt. How do you respond when you get hurt? We have that discussion in our family. We sometimes don't tell each other what really bothers us about the other, because you don't want to hurt them,
Right.
or you don't know how.
Yeah.
In our society, I think the Europeans are better at it than we are. In our society, we tend to hide emotions. We don't like to talk about them. And that hurts in the long run. I'm finding that out now. It's just a long history of each of us not being able to show who we really are. And then we don't know who we really are.
Yeah.
One of my sayings is, what do I want to be when I grow up? I really don't know. I think teaching is the thing. I've done that to some extent sometimes. And I don't have that opportunity right now. I do it through letters with my grandchildren. Periodically, I'll write to them and say, with thoughts.
Well, and didn't you say that you're writing your life story?
Yep. Slowly but surely. I do it in spurts.
Okay.
But something for them to have to know what made me what I am. It's a mixed story. So it makes me, and I like to write. I like to write essays. I'm doing a writing group now. So, yeah, I haven't been back to it for a while. I don't know why. I think I'm just letting it sort and simmer, and then go in spurts.
Well, I think that's the way the writing life does work. You're really inspired, and so you do a bunch, and then you got to get that.
And you have to think about it and let your subconscious meditate on it to see which direction you want to take in the writing, what you want to talk about.
Well, thank you very much for talking about your experiences in fencing, and it's been incredible to have the chance to sit down for a while and talk with you.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. And good luck with your podcast.
A big thank you once again to my friend Tony Escueda, who does all of the editing for this podcast, and who also created the really cool theme music and the strings that you're hearing right now. Also thanks to my wonderful husband, David Sierra, who created the logo for this podcast and who always provides me with unconditional support for this crazy project. Thank you as well to everyone who tunes into this podcast, either regularly or as a new listener. I really appreciate your enthusiastic support of this podcast and all of the recordings that I've made. For articles about fencing in general, you can visit my blog at sabercoachkate.wordpress.com. I'd also appreciate any suggestions or comments that you might have, and you can email those to me at sabercoachkate@gmail.com. Tune in next Thursday for the interview that I did with college professor and veteran foil champion Lynn Botello.